Well, it's Cineboys to Cinemen, episode 68.
68.
Hope you're well, wherever you are, whatever you're doing. This week, Megalopolis.
Yes.
Self-funded and directed by industry titan Francis Ford Coppola.
Yes.
The episode will, of course, focus considerably on him, a discussion about his work, and then, of course, before the film, perhaps a sort of little chat around these kind of big sort of society films.
Yeah, okay.
And I know that's sort of vague, but I guess in the sort of spirit of Megalopolis, we're going to talk about the kind of big sort of swing and a miss films.
Yeah.
Well, not necessarily always a miss. The big swing films that kind of really take it upon themselves to sort of critique the failings of a sort of crumbling society.
Yeah, painted with a broad brush.
Yes.
And, yeah, packing a lot into their sort of runtime.
Yes. And it's another opportunity for us to discuss Southland Tales.
Oh.
Which was a film that I couldn't shake thinking about throughout the entirety of watching Megalopolis.
Yep. Agreed. Very conceptually similar in terms of its sort of style and mood and kind of ambition.
Yeah.
And reception.
Yeah. I wonder if, like Southland Tales, this film's sort of reception will change over time.
Yeah, I kind of weirdly hope it does in a sense, but yeah, we'll get to that later.
Yeah, same, but yeah, we'll get to that later.
Yeah.
Anyway,
let's
Megalopolis,
Coppola,
society films.
Questing the cinematic void.
Okay, so Coppola, I think it'd be fair to say one of the kind of founding fathers of New Hollywood.
Yeah. Yeah,
you know, if you think about like the most sort of familiar faces, names, you'd look at, you know, Spielberg, Scorsese, Coppola.
Yeah.
You know, these are the guys that, as a result of their output, perhaps more on reflection, have become the kind of like, the kind of Mount Rushmore filmmakers of a kind of new dawn, culturally speaking.
Yeah, agreed. They ushered in a sort of era, I suppose, of kind of filmmaking. Very accessible filmmaking, like accessible in the sense that someone who might not typically be that into movies and going to the cinema a lot would know their names and know their output and be able to talk about them with a sort of general, I guess, like accomplishment. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I agree with that. That's something I've not really considered, but you're right about that sort of accessibility in terms of, you know, Scorsese's got his gangster films.
Yes, yeah.
Coppola's obviously got Apocalypse Now and also gangster films with
The Godfather.
The
Godfather.
Probably the most famous gangster film.
Yeah.
You could argue.
Definitely, yeah.
And obviously Lucas. Oh, did we mention Lucas? I don't think we mentioned
No,
Lucas.
but he's mates with him, isn't he? His output
he's
is a lot
probably in that group, isn't he? Like,
yeah.
He did some films, I can't remember what they're called. Spielberg, of course, E.T. Particularly E.T.
And that's it.
Yeah, that's
nothing
it.
else.
But, you know, you're right about this. These filmmakers have made films that transcend. You know, they're not just sort of talked about in kind of like the kind of spaces where sort of scarves and tortoiseshell glasses are ubiquitous.
Yeah.
No, you're definitely right about that. But what's interesting though about Coppola is that in many ways I think his filmography is sort of kind of harder to pin down than his sort of contemporaries.
Definitely. I mean, Spielberg is more hits than misses. Lucas has kind of built an empire on one particular property. Yeah. Coppola's sort of the less assured and like I guess it would be like less reliable. Would you say?
I don't know. It's bizarre, isn't it? I mean, because he's, you know, obviously he made Apocalypse Now and the Godfather films, and you could argue, particularly like the case of like Godfather Part 2, although I actually prefer the first one.
Yeah.
And you know, and Apocalypse Now, these are the films that are kind of like in like top 10 lists broadly. Yeah. Speaking for lots of people.
Oh man, I mean, Godfather wasn't that
particularly
number
men
2?
Of a certain age.
Yeah, I was gonna say Godfather was like number 2 on IMDb's top 250 for a fucking long time. I don't think it is anymore, but it was like a good 10-15 years where it occupied that territory.
Yeah,
and it is a generational thing. I think people of a certain generation have a lot more like reverence for Apocalypse Now and Godfather, particularly The Godfather, and I don't
Yeah,
think
I would
it's,
say so. The
I
Godfather.
don't think it stood the test of time as much as like Star Wars, for example. Why would it? I mean, but like, I still really enjoy them, and I was exposed to them quite early days.
Yeah, they're definitely
Godfather.
that. It's that kind of film, isn't it? The kind of legacy of that film. It kind of invites you in, probably a time in your life when you're not in the best position to kind of really, immerse yourself in it. But
Yeah.
you kind of focus more on the kind of like the visual elements or the violence or whatever.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I mean, I remember watching them actually rather embarrassingly, probably like for the first time when I was like 18, 19.
Oh, okay, well, yeah.
And it was pretty apparent why, to me anyway at the time, why they were so beloved very quickly.
Yeah, definitely.
Godfather Part 3 perhaps less so,
Yeah.
for obvious reasons, and that sort of speaks to the aforementioned perhaps patchiness of Coppola's work.
Yeah.
But when I think about Apocalypse Now, I mean, I was very lucky to catch that on the big screen when they did like another cut of the film or another sort of celebration of or another anniversary. That film just periodically just get re-released in some sort of new sort of way.
Brand new, like never before seen.
Yeah.
Like restored footage stuff. Yeah.
But then slowly kind of like elongating the film with scenes that don't necessarily complement it. I've found.
Yeah, definitely.
I always think about the scene with the French family.
Oh yeah, on the plantation.
Yeah, I mean, it starts well, and it kind of like does sort of kind of like evoke the spirit of the source material, Heart of Darkness, which is a book about colonialism.
Yeah.
I think it's the rubber trade in the Congo, I believe.
Okay. Yeah.
So you can sort of see the parallels, sort of narrative and thematic parallels. This idea of a plantation, a French family, obviously France, Vietnam was part of the French Empire. It was a colonial project until the Vietnamese booted them out, essentially.
Okay.
And they're starting the kind of like, I mean, it's a very, all conflict is complicated in build-up, but the Vietnam War is a particularly complicated one.
Yes.
And what I thought was quite interesting about the way Coppola took that kind of like colonial text and then translated it into the Vietnam era was that he managed to weave that complexity into this kind of like hazy, very sort of textured visual sort of kind of experience.
Yeah.
That does bowl you over every time you watch it. I mean, seeing anything in the big screen, particularly a film of that magnitude, is always going to bowl you over, but it is just such an impressive film.
I know, yeah. It's more, every time I watch it, I've seen it about 3 times, I think various cuts. Like, it does, the atmosphere is just really kind of pungent and obvious, and like it does kind of carry you through, almost like a psychedelic experience, I suppose. And that's the idea, I think. It is kind of pulling you through this nightmare, and this war is kind of like the backdrop which tinges everything sort of luridly yellow, and like, and oddly, like, it's so much more atmospheric than The Godfather, which is a lot more sort of plot and storytelling.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so
he's more reliant on performance.
Yeah.
And agreed. Yeah.
It's a testament to his ability to switch genres and kind of. I think he's, out of all of the, I was about to call them the frat pack, out of the aforementioned filmmakers, I think he's the best at doing that. Maybe Lucas, you could argue Lucas sort of dabbled in that kind
like
of
American Graffiti.
Yeah. But then, like, I think science fiction was his thing.
Yeah,
Spielberg is kind of a childhood adventures and things, and Coppola's more kind of weaving in and out. Although I know Spielberg did, he's done a broad range of topics. There's something about Coppola which is more kind of fascinating, I think.
Yeah, I think he takes more sort of stylistic risks.
Yeah.
Than Spielberg.
And financial ones as well.
Yeah, fucking A. I don't necessarily think that's a detriment to Spielberg. I know that obviously Spielberg can do, like you say, there's childhood sort of films, but he can also do war films or like historical epics. And I think, even in the later stages of his career, I actually think he's done a few duds, but I really liked The Fabelmans, so it shows that you can also do these kind of self-reflective kinds of films really well. Particularly looking back at this late stage of his life with a certain kind of honesty, which I really found quite interesting. I liked that film a lot.
Yeah, no, I enjoyed The Fabelmans.
But I just feel like, you're right in the sense with Coppola that he there's almost like a kind of like arrogance about him.
Yeah,
you know, which is like kind of admirable. Like even if his films don't hit, it's like fucking hell, like you gave it a good go. And you know, and I think Megalopolis is definitely kind of a testament to that, and I think one of the finest examples of that as far as his filmography goes.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
But it is interesting to me that a filmmaker whose output is so varied, yet at its very best is arguably some of the most iconic work of all time. He often isn't considered in that kind of pantheon of great filmmakers like your Scorsese's, you know. And I find it interesting that's the case.
Yeah, I think, you know, his output. You don't look forward to his next film necessarily, do you? Like, because he's done a lot of really obscure stuff.
He's done some great stuff under the radar. Like I always think about like The Outsiders and Rumblefish, which are two kind of like very films that centre on youths, like disaffected, disenfranchised youths and gangs, and you know, the films almost have kind of like a sort of weird sort of Walter Hill kind of vibe to them, and they're great as well. I mean, I think particularly Rumblefish, if I'm right, is like got a really interesting approach. I think it's black and white, but it has dashes of colour in it.
Oh, okay.
Sure.
Yeah.
So again, it speaks to Coppola's kind of stylistic exuberance.
Yeah. Ever changing.
Yeah, absolutely. It is interesting to think that, I don't know, it just feels like there's so much like space in his filmography.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, like huge gaps and huge sort of misfires in a conventional sense anyway. Whereas, like, I mean, like the main two of Godfather and Apocalypse Now, if we counted The Godfather was like one project.
Yeah.
And then arguably for me, apart from like The Outsiders and Rumblefish, the other, and Dracula's a bit of a strange one because that one did quite well, I think, and that's kind of remembered reasonably fondly.
Yeah, I quite like it.
Yeah,
I mean, again, it's like a lot of his filmography, apart from the big ones, the big two, it's sort of hard to remember them because you kind of watched them so long ago, but I remember quite liking it.
Yeah, I liked it. It's
as a product of its time, you know, I think it works quite well.
Yeah, and like it's sort of really interesting practical effects in that. Like, and he drafted his son in to do a lot of the effects, and they kind of work against all odds. Like usually nepotism doesn't really work that way, and it kind of is a bit naff. But you know, fair play to him. He's got a lot of interesting relatives as well. A lot of whom have gone on to do great things in their own right. Sophia
Coppola. It's a kind of like like a sort of dynasty. Yeah, he's at the centre of this kind of like dynasty. It's like Jason Schwartzman related to him as well.
I think so. Yeah, obviously Nicolas Cage. Sophia, and like the kind of host of others that are kind of indirectly related to him. Yeah,
it is strange.
Oh, Francis. Yeah, no, I think.
I was going to say he puts it about, but I don't think he does he?
No, I think it's quite. It's just. I think
I don't know why I was going to say that.
I think Los Angeles, you know, because it's he's very California native, isn't he?
Is he?
I think it's Napa Valley winery empire is California,
which played a huge role in the making of Megalopolis. Weirdly,
he sold off some of it. Yeah, mad.
I think that's it. If you think about like the kind of like film that is, and the kind of these big kind of like the kind of films that like look at an aspect of the way we live in the modern world and really zero in on it and then expand it as a part of this kind of like wider critique. It kind of feels like perfect for a kind of perfect kind of film for him. Do you know what I mean? Because his kind of style, the way he doesn't do things by halves, the way he seemingly doesn't really give a shit, and the fact that he like had to self-fund it because, you know, Megalopolis was a project that was in gestation for a very, very long time, and you had like various meetings and various points where like people were cast and like production was about to start, and it just fell through. You know, so like it kind of just feels that with the narrative about this film that's been building for such a long time, and the fact you had to self-fund it, it kind of feels like, I don't know, like a fitting kind of, not conclusion, I hope it isn't a conclusion, but it's like a sort of fitting film to sort of happen at this stage of his career and this stage of his life, given the trajectory of his career, as being responsible for some belters, and then also having these kind of like sort of long spaces between his films that you just kind of think, what's going on there? Like, you know, it just I don't know, it just feels quite fitting that he's come to this point that he's making this kind of film, you know. And that really for me worked in its favour.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, if you want to talk about, like, because he's known for putting everything on the line, for a project. And if we go back to Apocalypse Now, like, he started off by like remortgaging his mansion or something, which, you know, very fortunate to have a mansion in the first place.
Of course,
but he really did, like, I think every scrap of cash he had made from The Godfather was like put back into not a business, just this film.
Yeah.
And then I think the funding was like secured through various other means, and then like obviously the way it was made, like the extraordinary documentary Hearts of Darkness about the making of it, which has become a fable, almost, or maybe even more so revered than the film itself. The story behind its making, and just like the problems he had with cast members and an addiction, who was suffering from like addiction issues,
heart attacks.
Martin Sheen,
Did he have two?
I think it was one really bad one, and he had to crawl for help.
Fucking hell.
Yeah, I think he himself was sort of suffering at the time from
drug overdose, drinking,
alcoholism and things. Yeah. So he had all that going on. He had the all of the props, like the military props, were real from a civil war being fought nearby. I think the Philippines.
Yeah. It was from a neighbouring country, wasn't it?
Yeah. So they shot in the Philippines, and they kept having to take all the tanks and helicopters back to actually go and like fight, and then come back to the set of Apocalypse Now. I could go on about the making of that film, but but my point being is he's really put everything on the line.
He sort of embodies the chaos of the filmmaking process, doesn't he?
Yeah, completely.
There's kind of like this, like there's something very frantic about the assembly of his films. And like you say, it's that kind of like external narrative around the Apocalypse Now that almost solidified its greatness on a deeper level than perhaps any other film that I can think of, you know, in the way that it kind of... And the only film I can think of about the kind of troubled production being almost more interesting than the film itself is like Raw.
Oh, yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like something like that, do you know?
Yeah, completely.
And in that case, obviously, there's like big cats mauling the crew and mauling the cast and crew.
Scalping them and stuff.
Yeah, so...
And Tippi Hedren kind of getting wrapped up in
the whole thing. That's fucking weird. Yeah. I don't know how she got in that. Very strange.
Yeah, like with regards to that kind of fable, and you could argue Megalopolis has a certain amount of that.
Yeah.
Not as much, but there's stories about the production of it and about his kind of perfectionism and conduct as well, which have kind of graced our phone screens. And it's sort of, I don't know, there's a mythology surrounding him and his way of working, which for better or worse makes the film more popular and more mythological, I suppose.
Yeah, I completely agree.
And, you know, the plot of Megalopolis, we'll talk about the film more later on, but, you know, it's about this sort of, you know, if you want to strip it down, it's about this sort of misunderstood genius who puts everything on the line in order to make a better future.
That's funny, I never made that connection. That's funny.
Yeah, I did think, like,
that sort of devalues it ever so slightly if you think about it that way.
It does, you know, I think it's just a fascinating artifact in that
absolutely.
regard. I think for me, like, Apocalypse Now, I think might actually been personally, ultimately, my favourite of his films.
I think so, for me. I mean, I think it's also a really rare example of a film that's better than the book, better than its source material.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
I mean, I haven't read Heart of Darkness for a very long time, and I would be lying if I think I read it during university, and I was probably just reading it to say I had read it. Do you know what I mean? As opposed to actually reading it. It's a short book, though. I could revisit it and get through it pretty quickly, but I don't remember. You know, I just feel like it was such a bold choice to take it and situate it in another era. And of course, as we sort of said earlier, it's not necessarily thematically different because, you know, the Vietnam War is an example of kind of like a different kind of colonialism, the kind of spread of American imperialism.
Yeah.
So there is obviously, you know, historical thematic parallels that allow the film to situate so comfortably in that era. But as you said before, there is just such a sort of a kind of psychedelic haze to that film, you know, and how almost the conflict is secondary.
Yeah,
and it sort of speaks more to, I guess, this sort of collective, sort of psychological collapse of a kind of entire identity. in the kind of as far as the sort of American outlook goes, you know.
Yeah, and it just sort of the spread of a kind of humanity virus, so kind of like American bring, like just the kind of brashness of the soldiers and their conduct, and then like the way that it's like at points in the film you don't feel like you're in Vietnam.
No.
You feel like you're in America all of a sudden again, and then like it'll cut back to more of the sort of landscape, and you realise that it's an invading army, not a standing one. It's like, I don't know, and then it's punctuated by this just like grim hum of atmosphere, which I really like get behind. I think, like, you know, that's why I like Alex Garland films. I think he's like heavily Apocalypse Now
Civil
inspired.
War, of course,
yeah, like some, you know, sometimes for a lot of people it's too much of an inspiration, I think, for him.
He gives the conflict of the conflict in Vietnam a kind of lived-in quality. I think in many ways the kind of Vietnam War was interesting because of the kind of way in which there were sort of large amounts of American soldiers on the ground who were vehemently against the conflict. And a lot of their conduct in Vietnam reflected that.
Right, yeah.
With the sort of the pervasive use of drugs. There's lots of really fascinating stories about soldiers just like downing tools and refusing to fight, killing like commanding officers,
right? Yeah,
taking over boats.
Okay,
you know? So there's this kind of like sense that I guess this disenfranchisement that sort of bleeds into that kind of like lived-in feel of the conflict. It just gives it such a bizarre feeling. Like it's such a. I remember just thinking that when I came out of the cinema during the like 5,000th re-release, but it just shocked me how like odd the film makes you feel. It's a very odd feeling film.
It is, it's below the line. It's just really unique atmosphere, and one that many filmmakers have tried unsuccessfully to recreate. I think it's a product of its time. I don't actually think you can recreate it anymore. Like the film stock isn't available anymore.
No.
The army in the Philippines are not available anymore. Like, and obviously all the actors and the way it was cast was kind of interesting. It's like Harrison Ford crops up in it at one point.
Yeah, right near the start, isn't he?
Yeah, and then Lawrence Fishburne's in it as well.
He lied about his age, didn't he?
He did, yeah.
Which is bizarre in itself, because
really
it would have happened a lot in the military.
Yeah. Brilliant. Like, I can't really fault it, even though I think the only problem with it is the mythologizing of it has created, like you say, these different versions, which can become same with Blade Runner. Like which one do I watch? Which ones? And people have different opinions about which one is the best one.
Yeah.
And it can become quite confusing to talk about. You know, when we talk about the plantation scene earlier, like some people might,
it's like 30-40 minutes.
It's so long. It is, and it's already a long film.
I kind of admire, again, I don't know if this is just kind of, I don't know, there is a part of me that thinks, fuck it, chuck it in, why not at this stage? But then at the same time, it is like, I do remember, like, there was like a point where you could tell in the cinema where everyone was kind of like lulling. You know?
It's a point, I mean, just the energy of it and makes the viscerality like bearable, but when there's nothing much going on, when they're just sat at a table chatting, it's like, this is just like there's no energy anymore. No matter, your film isn't engaging anymore. Like, as horrible as it is because the content of the scene might be relevant, but the pace needs to, like, from an editing point of view, needs to quicken, because otherwise you're sort of, I guess, weirdly, the audience is going to be subject to something which isn't of the same pace as the rest of the film, and it just that is one of the worst examples of that I think I've ever seen. Of just this, like, because some films benefit from it, like films that are based on plays are quite often have a scene which is like 40 minutes just sat around a table, but Apocalypse Now is like, what, 200 pages, something like that. So like, come on. I agree with you. I think it could have been maybe put on a DVD as a supplemental extra. Anyway.
I mean, I guess it didn't come out at the time of the release of the original cut, so
for good, wisely
so you
deleted.
could argue that doing it now, it's like, well,
And
there's
then,
nothing that, Coppola's got nothing to lose by doing that, I guess.
Yeah, and you get stories about, Coppola always wanted to include it, and it was the studio, but then it can't have been because it was American Zoetrope that produced it, which is Francis Ford Coppola's company. So I don't know if maybe it was a distribution thing, but anyway,
Probably,
this kind of stuff gets kind of Chinese whispered down, and then it's really difficult to actually find any primary sources for as to whether the intention was to leave it in or not. So I don't know, but I mean, speaks to the power of the film more broadly that I'm banging on about it to this extent. Yeah. What was your? So you watched The Godfather when you were 18?
Yeah.
First, okay. So I was a bit young. I think I was 14.
Right.
And the first one really has a way of kind of grabbing you and holding you, and the narrative is propelled forward by this really interesting sort of family crime saga, and on top of that you get all of the sort of iconic moments, like the bit at the restaurant, the guy gets shot in the head, and you get the iconic lines and stuff, and it's almost a pleasure to sort of realise where they came from, having heard them be referenced by sort of older members of society, or just at kind of birthday parties that you've been, parents couldn't find a babysitter, and so you get taken along to them, you know what I mean? And people start talking about films, and The Godfather always comes up. But the thing that I think part 2 doesn't have is that grip. I think it's really captivating as a story, and I sort of pretended to like it more than one for a long time, but my actual experience of watching it was quite, it'd been pepped up, a lot of people had talked it up, and then it was presented to me, and I was like, well, that was really good, but it was long, and I was 14. It was fucking long.
Yeah, it's a long
Part
film.
2 was a long film.
Yeah.
And the sort of expanding narrative threads of it, I got lost a little bit, and so it wasn't, at least on I've seen it twice. I think I liked it more the second time, but I wasn't as impressed with it as kind of, just because that classic thing of having a film getting hyped up and then it being a disappointment by proxy, I guess.
It's bizarre, isn't it? I think the thing about them is they're almost part of this kind of like we said before, we alluded to in the beginning of the episode, it's they're part of this kind of dad's favourite toolkit.
Yes.
So you almost think of it to be put in the same sort of pantheon as The Who and Top Gear. And
right, okay.
More so for Top Gear is off-putting.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
there is just something about it, but when you talk to a broader sway of people, you realise that the film has it's not that. But it almost has been, it's funny how these kind of, from your kind of childlike perception, that, and then you kind of pigeonhole certain things.
Yeah.
And you just always think, it's like a dad's film.
Green Mile was a bit like that.
Actually. Okay.
Yeah. Me. Although I love that film, but there are those
kinds of films that just have this veneer around them, which is not necessarily warranted whatsoever. But but then you watch it and you think, God, this is just a fucking great movie. The first one is like you say, but it's comparatively to the second very succinct. And I think what I quite like, I love the second one, don't get me wrong.
Oh, me, yeah.
But the second one, it's interesting that a film that's so expansive and broad narratively, that covers so much time, sort of exploring the Corleone dynasty and its origins in Sicily, isn't it?
Yeah,
and then, the sort of eventual transition into America and all that kind of stuff. It's interesting to me that film is so beloved by so many people, because I feel like the same people that would have been probably bored with the kind of additional 40 minutes on the plantation of Apocalypse Now aren't bored by Godfather 2 Part 2. And there are not that there's necessarily equivalency in terms of but in terms of the kind of plot, it's comparatively far more sedate than the first one.
Yeah.
But I guess, but perhaps it's a bit of a naff thing to compare it to that scene, because you're really getting to the nucleus of the characters and seeing how they became the people that they are in the first film. Yeah,
if it was made today, it would have been like a mini-series.
Yeah.
I think. It occupies that territory quite nicely. Whereas the first one is a great film with a beginning, middle, and an end. The second one sort of is a sprawling, not a mess, but it's just it lends itself better to that it's sort of weirdly serialized, but arguably punctuated by a really great, Fredo, the betrayal bit, right? I remember that really clearly.
Yeah.
And the chaos that ensues. That is a sort of centerpiece of that film. So, yeah, a lot to love about both of them. Third one failed for a few reasons, I think. Just difficult to top, really, wasn't it? Part 1 and 2.
It almost seems it also seems impervious to critical revisionism. Like, you get a lot of films that come out and everyone's like, no.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden people start going, he was
trying something else here. What was he trying to say?
And I love that when that happens, but part 3 really doesn't seem to have had that. I really don't remember part 3 very well at all. Nowhere near enough to talk about it in any great detail.
Yeah, so I bought them.
That's what you tune in for, right, guys?
I bought all 3 on DVD in like a box set, and part 3 had a really weird case. It was just like I can't remember. It was just like a balding guy with sunglasses on. I can't remember the context, but yeah, Sofia Coppola got treated pretty unfairly by the critics at the time. I think because she was sort of like a really late addition to the film.
Right, yeah.
Although obviously there's like a nepotism side to it. I think when Winona Ryder was meant to be in it,
Oh, right, okay.
I have a weird feeling it was meant to be her, and she was in Rome, and she was like had to back out because she was just exhausted or something, and got hastily replaced by Coppola's daughter.
Okay.
Not the best move, but
interesting.
Again, like unfair, I think, because she was just a child. I don't think she'd ever acted before, but yeah, like
Well, she grew up and went on to do great things. I mean, yeah, nepotism probably played a part, but I mean, she's clearly...
Yeah, she's made her own. I think she's since got by on merit.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think, with I watched The Beguiled again recently. That's a great film.
Yeah. I mean, her first short, is it Lick the Stars?
Oh, right, okay.
I think Mubi showed it. I think that's what it's called. And
yeah.
I think Peter Bogdanovich is in it.
Oh, right, okay, yeah.
That's like, that's fucking nepotism.
Yeah. Calling in a favour there.
Yeah.
Plays
like the principal of this the high school, which the sort of female characters study in. But yeah, I mean, even that, you can sort of start to see her command of that kind of like teen experience, the young sort of feminine experience, which is kind of like, I guess, been the kind of through line throughout the vast majority of her career.
Yeah, definitely.
And it's something that she's kind of adapted to suit various stories, most recently, of course, with Priscilla, which I thought was one of her best films in a very long time.
Oh, I loved that film. Yeah, really interesting.
No, you're right. I think whilst it's obvious that her career probably starting out, it didn't hurt to have your dad being Francis Ford Coppola.
Yeah.
I think, she's definitely earned her stripes, I think. Not, it feels a bit twatty for us to say that as if it matters what we say, but... yeah.
No, I agreed. And it is... The threequel often has problems of that ilk. Even like Return of the Jedi... people widely, until more recent ones came out, people widely consider that to be the weakest of the 3. Dark Knight Rises, it's one of those, isn't it? Like, I'm struggling to think of apart from like Return of the King, and even then, that's the weakest of the 3. Controversial, perhaps.
Oh,
and very off topic, but it's just hard to do a third, isn't it? I think. Whereas a sequel can be brilliant.
What The Godfather did is that he went. Obviously, the sequel goes back, and I think that's quite a sort of interesting way to take a kind of like franchise, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, hesitant to use the word franchise in the context of Godfather, but I mean, in terms of like as a storytelling kind of justification for its existence, it works perfectly.
Yeah.
To go back, to go right. Let's explore why the characters are the way they are.
Yeah.
So let's have a think about big, broad sort of films that analyse society.
Okay. Yes.
I think what seems to drive a lot of these films is anxiety.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
Anxiety, amongst the backdrop of a kind of technologically advanced landscape.
Or developing.
Never, I mean, obviously you can argue that a lot of sci-fi films that kind of like exaggerate or predict the kind of trajectory of technology and where it's going and how that sort of impacts on the kind of the human experience and the world that we inhabit. Obviously you could perhaps factor them into this kind of society films kind of discussion, but I'm thinking more about the films that perhaps have their foot in a more sort of familiar world to our own.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
And that is kind of leads very nicely to Southland Tales. In the sense that, you know, that film is kind of like the ultimate sort of anxiety film, I think.
Yeah.
It's just, you know, and what I love, I think the benefit of being able to reflect on it is probably why the film has been so kind of like critically, you know, the kind of consensus on the film has changed substantially, because it really just taps into that kind of fear of this, because technology felt close. You know, it wasn't just like people in the 60s saying in 2025 we'll have flying cars.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
It was like people had phones and the internet was like just starting to get its sort of, you know, claws into people, and you know, there was this kind of like potential and suggestion that these things could really take human beings somewhere special.
Yeah.
But there's already this undercurrent of cynicism and fear.
Yeah, about surveillance. And
Yeah,
There's a lot
yeah.
of stuff about surveillance in Southland Tales and political superpowers.
Yes.
And
so
they're-
monopolising on these sorts of things.
Yeah,
The internet was supposed to be the space that was free from all that. It was free from the kind of meddling hands of like corporate and political power.
Yeah.
But as we kind of know now, you know, not to give the film too much credit on that basis, but you know, it's almost become like an arm of these kinds of powers. So it hasn't really delivered on the promises that a lot of people felt it would have done.
Yeah,
like properly liberate the human race. You know.
Yeah. I love the Southland Tales vision of the future and just how alien it is, but also so grounded, like you say, and sort of set in the world we live in today. But like it's just it's skewed just enough for you to think that this could be a future, like, because everyone in that film is walking around as if the things around them are making sense.
Yeah.
And there's like portals, like Dwayne Johnson coming out of portals and stuff. And like everyone's just like accepting of it. And like there's a big kind of blimp at the end. And like, nobody's looking up at it and going, wow. It's just like normalcy to them. And like, I love how Richard Kelly kind of constructs this bizarre, unique and like kind of, it is like like futuristic, sprawling, celebrity obsessed nation, and have everyone in it just accept it as norm. I love that about it, and that's why I think one of the reasons why it sort of has that kind of critical reevaluation. I mean, there's a lot of other stuff in that film that I love as well, but that is one of them for sure.
Yeah, it's broad strokes. There's something so admirable about it. The fact that it kind of like just flits between so many different things, and the manner of that flittering. Like, you know, a character can have this kind of like extended piece of dialogue that it'll just cut to something else. You know, it's just so sort of quick and snappy and like true to the form, I guess, of kind of that kind of internalized anxiety. The brain is just rapidly cycling through all these worries and concerns.
Yeah.
And Kelly's sort of storytelling approach seems to sort of be modelled on that. I don't know if that's deliberate, but it feels to me that it's very reflective of the kind of individual and collective anxieties and the way in which, you know, the increasingly modernising world accelerates them and allows them to be accelerated through the advent of the internet and all this kind of stuff and surveillance and
celebrity and
celebrity obsession is the kind of pinnacle of what you can hope for in terms of what you can achieve.
I think with Southland Tales, what happened was he made Donnie Darko, and that was like in many ways a very sort of offbeat, off-kilter film, and the reception was really warm. Like he got a lot of love for that film, and there was a kind of a dedicated cult following which expanded and became more of a kind of mainstream cult following, and from that his sort of attitude towards what the audience wanted was like, oh, they like appreciate a really, really deep subtextual sort of reading, and like I'm gonna double down that on. I'm gonna do like everything that I like. I'm gonna do my sort of Odyssey here. I'm gonna do my kind of magnum opus. This is what I think about like Iraq, celebrities, the internet, the future, the uncertainty of the future, anxiety, and he's like just putting everything into this big melting pot, thinking like pretty assuredly that like it's gonna go down well, and when it didn't, it must have been a real horrible shock. But nonetheless, I think all the ingredients are in there and are weirdly working in tandem, and I have it on Blu-ray, and I try and watch it quite often.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's good. I can't get over how much I love that film. I don't know why. It keeps coming back, but something special about it for sure. And something like that I haven't seen in it yet. I think because I think there must be something in it there must be something he's trying to say that's pretty basic that I haven't quite got my grasp on yet, and I need to watch it again and do some more reading about it. And I love going down that rabbit hole.
Yeah, it's a film that invites those kind of rabbit holes.
Yeah.
Because it is. I mean, it is in points impossibly vague.
Oh yeah,
to the point where it's like, do you really know what you're doing?
This is the flip side of it,
and this is kind of something you could level at the gates of Coppola and Megalopolis.
Coppolis.
Oh yeah,
Francis
like
Ford Coppolis.
Yeah. It's kind of like there's a sort of like either a real like grating levels of unsubtlety, or like just like this kind of equally grating vagueness. It just sort of invites this kind of sort of thought as you're watching it, like, what come on, man, like, what the fuck are you doing? Like, do you how committed are you to this kind of critique, or how committed are you to kind of the ideas around this sort of critique?
Yeah.
And in a way, it kind of works to Southland Tales' benefit, because I don't know, it kind of creates that sort of vagueness. I guess invites more sort of like greater levels of interpretation.
Yeah. What was your intention behind that particular moment?
Yeah. Was it just like an off-the-cuff sort of creative decision?
Yeah.
Or were you being like calculated and sort of...
I'd love to sit down with him and just break it down.
Yeah.
Right, this bit, the bit with the car where he's having sex with the other car, what's that about?
Yeah.
Because I still don't know about that bit. Hopefully he'll have an astute response, and he might be like,
Yeah.
Don't know.
I just got given loads of money.
Yeah.
And that's the interesting thing about it. Like we said, obviously the success of Donnie Darko, the cult following that obviously bled into the mainstream. The studios were like, this guy's a genius, give him loads of money.
Yeah.
And I don't think the studios really do that kind of thing anymore.
No.
So again, in itself, the film, not just kind of in terms of its sort of thematic content, just the story, again, the story behind the film gives it this kind of like, a relic of a different time. In the sense that the sort of studio attitude was like, you do one good film and we're going to put a huge amount of faith and then subsequently money into you.
Yeah.
And then they just goes and does that, and they're like, oh.
Okay. Yeah, I think it got like really badly received at Cannes, like boos and stuff.
Right.
It's always horrible to hear. Even when a film is shit and is just shit, it's horrible to hear that.
Yeah.
It gets booed. You're like, oh, really?
I mean, we might do it like when we do like our sort of Cineboys film nights, but there's like 4 of us in a fucking living room.
Yeah.
Like, no one's gonna care what it's not gonna go anywhere. Whereas like if you're at Cannes and everyone's doing it, that must be horrible.
Awful, yeah. And maybe the reason why he waited a few years to make his next one, The Box. Have you seen that?
No, I actually haven't.
It's funny because he's clearly been humbled by the experience of Southland Tales, and I think. Yeah, because the story is very straightforward. It does go weird, but
Cameron Diaz.
Cameron Diaz, and the guy that played Nixon in Frost Nixon, what's his name? Frank Langella.
Oh yeah.
The initial, it's like a write on a napkin type plot. It goes in a weird direction, but the start of it is just like press a button, someone dies in the world, but you get $1 million. I think it's one of them.
Right.
I still quite liked it, but my point is you can tell that he's been humbled by Southland Tales.
More subdued.
Yeah. And also, like, again, like, to kind of, in the interest of fairness, you got to think that, these sort of big society films are, by their nature, going to be confusing because they've got a lot to say and they're trying to paint like they're trying to cover a huge topic, which is complicated. But then you got films like The Matrix, which are actually sort of simple and still have something to say about society.
Yeah.
I don't know. Would you lump The Matrix into that sort of broad strokes?
I think
critique?
I think you're right to mention it in the sense that it does kind of about the kind of way that we view society, the spectacle of society, I guess. And it's quite a cynical film in that way.
Oh yeah.
I would say so. I mean, I think it's different in the sense that obviously the kind of like the kind of craft as far as the action goes is a kind of, as a plot device, I think takes it a bit away from the kind of films that I'm thinking about. You know? But I think you're right in the sense that it's such a big part of what The Matrix is about. Yeah. And again, very much in the similar vein to Southland Tales, it really captures that sort of potent cocktail of feelings and emotions of the time.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
And in a way, thinking about kind of like Y2K, 2000s era sort of anxiety films, End of Days.
Okay, yeah.
With Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Yeah.
We watched that at Alex's house.
Yeah.
Were you there? You were there, weren't you?
I was. Yes, I think I was pretty exhausted. I think I might have drank a bit too much because I actually don't remember a great deal about it. But again, it's just a pretty sort of straight-laced sort of Arnie action film. Yeah,
at the tail end of his kind of like action era before he went into kind of like more like comedies. But you know, like there's again, it's just a film that perfectly sort of in parts just perfectly crystallizes that kind of like naff, grungy, anxiety.
Yeah.
You know, and I don't know why. To me, it's just such a lovely kind of comforting thing to sort of engorge yourself on. And what's Arnold Schwarzenegger's character in it called? Jericho.
Okay, yeah, I do remember this film.
Yeah. Worth it. And Gabriel Byrne plays the devil.
Mate,
I feel like I've spoken about this already on this podcast, so I can't quite remember, but fuck it, I love that film.
Oh, mate, yeah, no, it's all great. Worth a mention. And yeah, I mean, like, we've talked about Beau is Afraid already. That's a kind of sprawling, that's a swing and a bit of a miss, arguably.
Well, it's a swing and a hit until like the second half, then for me it became a bit of a miss.
Yeah.
I really liked like the first 45 minutes. I thought the first 45 minutes were really great.
Yeah.
And I liked the latter. I kind of like didn't dislike the film, but in comparison to the sort of first half, I thought the second sort of let him down a little bit.
Yeah, I think to take it, I mean, given enough time, I sort of think that film's about parenting a little bit more than anything else. But parenting within society, and how
the parenting is reflective.
Yeah,
of the kind of increasing anxieties, of the kind of like, I guess like there's all this sort of stuff about climate, the kind of like collapse of the social fabric of society, and how that kind of. Yeah, no, I really like the first half of that movie. I even think if you go back to like a film that's like making these big swings, like Citizen Kane.
Oh, mate, okay, yeah.
And that's a film that was kind of like maligned for a very long time. And
it's odd to think that.
Yeah, now it's like lauded as like, one of the greatest films of all time.
That has a very nice, neat bow on the end, doesn't it? Like, I think that is. I mean, it's revolutionary in a lot of ways. Like even in the way it was shot and the way, like, it's like one of the first films to have a ceiling in it. Apparently, because from sound stages didn't have a ceiling, so you didn't shoot the ceiling. But yeah, in terms of the kind of role of wealth in society, I suppose. Yeah,
wealth and the kind of impact that has on like press and how those things can coalesce. Yeah, and sort of establish a kind of hierarchy that is not really in the benefit of
an idea
wider society.
The guy becomes an idea, doesn't he? And like everyone's looking at him as if he's more than a man. And I love that. I do still. I mean, the ending's talked about loads, but I love that ending because it brings it all back to just him being a little boy and he's just a normal boy. And he's unremarkable. I like
his
that.
death is unremarkable. I
love that.
The damp nature of his death is very powerful.
Yeah.
Because we sort of we build people up, we build ourselves up, but in the end,
that's
it. Done. Everything we've done. Sorry. You keep hustling, you lot. It'll all work out, I'm sure. I just think, particularly in the context of films that don't get, that didn't get the kind of initial kind of critical praise that, and then subsequently, I mean, obviously you could argue, or definitely don't even need to argue, Citizen Kane's kind of critical, the sort of critical revision has put it stratospherically higher than Southland Tales, but
for now,
give it another 30 years. We'll have to do some just sort of aggressive lobbying to get Southland Tales to the same level as Citizen Kane.
weirdly, I don't know why it's popped into my head, because maybe it might not really fit, but critical revisionism American Psycho gets put on a pedestal, and actually when you look at the reviews from the 2000s, pretty lukewarm.
Oh, really?
Like, yeah, a lot of people, I love that film. I think it's great, but
being remade.
Sorry?
Being remade, isn't it?
Yep.
Luca Guadagnino.
Really?
Mm.
Who's playing Patrick Bateman
Austin
again?
Butler.
Okay, interesting. Don't know about that. I think a lot of people are going to be annoyed by that, but whatever. Could be interesting. Yeah, I mean, that is very society in a contained way, contained to sort of Wall Street and the sort of yuppie twats who sort of control their people's finances and their conduct, and just, break it down. The idea is pretty simple. You can get away with like kicking dogs to death and murdering homeless people and like being a maniac because you blend in, like, that as a comment on society. I think it's pretty obvious, but like
bizarrely
very entertaining,
co-opted.
Oh yeah, and that as well.
Yeah.
People love him, don't they? People are like,
so bizarre.
Like Patrick Bateman. You're like, oh God, all right.
Particularly his particular focus on the way he speaks to other people, particularly women.
Yes,
you could be thinner. That kind of, there's like I remember coming across an Instagram page, like every day they just upload the same scene of him saying to a woman, "You could be thinner, you could be this."
Wow.
Sort of thing.
Okay.
And there's no sort of irony or kind of. It's very much like this guy is like his sort of philosophy is something to kind of like, guide us,
strive towards.
Yeah,
that's bizarre.
So strange. It's the kind of similar. I think we've said this before, but same with Fight Club. But the kind of people that kind of revere Patrick Bateman, revere.
Yeah, Tyler Durden.
Thank you.
Even though he's like pretty obvious by the end, he's sort of.
It's just so, to me, it just feels so blatantly obvious that. Well, it's just so blatantly troubling, perhaps, to invest so much,
I think like it's
in
funny.
These people when they represent the exact thing that the thing you want from them is the thing that's being mocked by the presence of them.
Yeah. It's funny because like you're cued into following the philosophy of a character by the presence of a movie star, I think, occasionally.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
Brad Pitt, Christian Bale. That might be why. Because at the time, I mean, Brad Pitt was pretty famous by Fight Club.
Yeah, Bale wasn't that big at that point, was he? Really?
That was just arguably his breakout role. But now, looking back, obviously people will have watched a lot of his other films where he is
Batman.
the hero. Gone back and watched this and thought, oh, this is like similar to watching Batman, like it's just something to strive towards. And they're gonna do like 1,000 stomach crunches in the morning and like wear, take out a fucking mortgage to get a suit and stuff.
Yeah, I guess more so in the case of, we're going way off piece.
Oh mate, yeah.
But I guess more in the case of Patrick Bateman, he's kind of emblematic of that kind of like hustle attitude, isn't he?
Yeah.
Which even that he seems pretty disinterested in as a character, I think. And like his sort of yuppie, his kind of business he works in and all that, it's very vague.
Yeah, they all have the same job title.
Yeah. and that vagueness sort of supplements the kind of the overarching themes of the narrative. But
yeah,
I guess in terms of the kind of like lifestyle and kind of like the self-care, as sort of intrinsic to this philosophy of like the kind of like hard-working hustler lifestyle. Like if you're not getting up at 3 a.m. and doing crunches, you're a low life and should be sort of like just cast out amongst all the sort of used condoms and Burger King wrappers.
I
don't know. Interesting.
Yeah.
Right, should we talk about Megalopolis?
Yeah,
that seems like a logical place to lose it.
Yeah, definitely.
To leave it. Very much in the spirit of the films we've talked about. We alluded to this in the beginning, but a very broad film, massive, in fact, a film that sort of seeks to cure the growing sort of socio-political schisms in our own society.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
This kind of, and I think it sort of sets it up in the context of you've got these kind of like various powers at play that are very much representative of the powers at play now in our lives. So you've got, well, not necessarily in the case of Adam Driver's character, I guess, but you've got, he kind of he's sort of offering this kind of utopian ideal of a better life, a better society.
Yep. Which
is rebuffed steadfastly by Giancarlo Esposito's character,
Oh yeah.
who is this kind of like, well, he's the mayor, and he is basically no, we need to stick to what we know, because any kind of utopian dream is just that. It's fanciful, it's facile, it's childish, it's not grounded in reality, so it could never work. And that is often a kind of a criticism of anyone that kind of comes into this kind of, who bursts into the scene politically or anything like that, who even suggests anything different, a different approach. Regardless or irrespective, you know, if you're ideologically, you know, on the level with that person, it's just immediately seen as this kind of insult to the way that things are. But it's that way that things are that's sort of contributing to so much strife and difficulty, and that almost kind of like stubborn refusal to accept anything else is almost sort of, in at least in Coppola's eyes, is a part of the problem.
Yes. You know, you could, very obvious parallels between the way he likes to make films and the way the studio system is. So like,
true. There's that. In that
the
sense.
American Zoetrope thing, and like that. This film has the American Zoetrope like label on it, and his philosophy surrounding filmmaking is largely the same. It's like, you know, the way funding is secured, he doesn't like that, and the way like, the sort of traditional casting process, like documented accounts of him like openly opposing that sort of ideal and that structure, the Hollywood structure, even though, you know, he's I keep calling him a California native. He might not be. He may well not be, but he certainly resides there. But anyway, he occupies that sort of Napa Valley, I think, is where he lives. So, yeah, the film Megalopolis is very much him writing down his own ideas, I think, and simultaneously showing a fascination with Rome and the fall of Rome. And the Roman ideal and that kind of way of living. And
the sort of transition from the sort of republic to an empire.
Yes,
which
that's
is
it.
You know, weird to think that in the same year we've had Gladiator, which is kind of like a film that longs for a return to the republic, which which is kind of like romanticized as this kind of like more sort of authentic kind of democracy. You know, and it's sort of it's sort of bizarre that you've got a film that's kind of mirroring the sort of fall of Rome into a kind of more kind of like, I guess, autocratic regime, and the kind of city, which is New York, but it's called New Rome, isn't it?
That's right.
It's kind of like a very sort of naff kind of political allegory.
Oh yeah,
in that sense.
It's one of the weakest aspects of the film, I think, is the way that the setting is deployed, and the way Coppola sort of weaves the sort of historical context of Roman Republic versus Empire into the it could have been handled better and more subtly.
So poor.
It's
sort of handled largely by the voice of Lawrence Fishburne.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that.
And then there's like these sort of like these kind of almost like title cards. Written in the style of like, you know, like
a tablet, isn't it?
So naff, I thought.
Yeah, I didn't like that bit. Any of that, the sort of Roman stuff wasn't handled brilliantly. I think when the film gets more abstract is when I started to really get behind it. There's a sequence with Adam Driver kind of going on a bit of a bender, and he there's loads of shots of his face, kind of green and red, that. That's shot really nicely. Like he's kind of employing some interesting cinematography.
Is it digital?
Oh, it must be. I think
it felt very. Things felt very sterile.
Well, like I think he probably utilised that technology partially to save money. It's his own money, of course, but also, you know, the whole film is about looking forward and looking ahead and sort of embracing the new. So I'd be surprised if he shot it on film.
Yeah, it didn't look like it was shot on film.
A lot of it looked like
have a lot of texture to it.
No, a lot of it looked like it was shot on a volume stage with a lot of sort of digital enhancement, quite obvious digital enhancement at that point.
So it's quite ropey, isn't it?
Yeah, it's really like some of it is kind of, it works, but some of it, like, they just framed it wrong, and it's just like like even like the frame rate looks weird. Like this sort of frame blending stuff going on with the clouds at one point when he's on that weird like
clock tower thing.
Yeah, and he sort of I can't even really remember. It's actually been a while since I've seen this film.
There's a bit where him and his ultimately, spoiler, sort of future wife are like getting a lift up to the top of that tower.
Oh yeah,
and the green screen is so bad.
Yeah, it's
I
bad,
was like, this is like room levels bad.
Yeah,
like, and I'm not, sort of plucking that film out is kind of like, I'm not doing that for comic effect. I'm being like genuine. I really thought, I was like, fucking hell, that is atrocious.
Yeah.
Like,
to briefly sort of go into that from a sort of technical point of view, green screen is like quite often, if you light it well and if you know what you want to put in the background, it works. But if you don't know what you're going to put in the background, it looks shit. And that's, I think, that's what happens here. Because your foreground subjects are just flat. They're not lit with any, like, if you want your sun to be over there, you've got to light them in that fashion. Similarly, if there's objects that are kind of influencing you have to put something in the background, and that you can tell at that point in time, he didn't know where he wanted his actors to be. And it's, and similarly at the end as well, I don't think he quite understood what he wanted Megalon to look like. So everyone is just looking pretty flat against a kind of flat card behind them. But there are points where it looks quite good. So it's a real, like, weirdly unfinished.
Yeah, I mean the visual stylings of the film perhaps more reflective of the film more broadly than we'd so initially considered. Yeah. I mean, what did you think about the kind of performances? Because such a sort of incongruent mix of different performances.
Yeah, it's like a stage play.
It's very kind of like very sort of. There's a lot of histrionics.
Okay, yeah.
A lot of like people going over, going above and beyond the demands
like
of the
Shia
performance.
LaBeouf, for example.
Yeah. Like obviously playing the kind of like the sort of covetous spawn of like an oligarch,
Oh yeah,
the kind of people played by John White, who's as you said earlier, he's sort of representative of Coppola's sort of refusal to kind of bow to the more conventional sort of Hollywood casting thing. Obviously, White's been very sympathetic of kind of like quite extreme views. And as a result of that, has kind of been left out in obscurity. And Coppola's been very vocal about casting people that had sort of being quote unquote cancelled. I guess that was kind of the reason for Shia LaBeouf's character.
Makes sense. Weird performance. Yeah, LaBeouf is
Dustin Hoffman.
Yeah, he's had a couple of
allegations about his on-set behaviour, like for a real long time, and this sort of the way he particularly treats sort of his sort of female contemporaries.
I think there's a smattering of others as well that are kind of troublesome in some, sometimes proven, sometimes unproven ways. He himself has come under scrutiny for the same reason. Apparently differing. I don't want to get into this too much because it's not really. I don't really enjoy talking about it, but apparently he, was sort of inappropriate towards a number of extras for a nightclub scene. And he defended himself by saying he's too shy. It's something odd going on there.
It kind of undercuts the message of the film slightly, I think. I mean, irrespective of whether these kind of accusations, more so towards the actors, I guess, are founded or not.
Yeah,
it's like the whole idea of this film is it's supposed to be about like human connectivity and
progress and utopia.
But you're kind of like almost sort of like old man yells at cloud kind of thing.
Yeah,
do you know what I mean? And that doesn't seem particularly conducive to the ideas of the film that you're trying to sort of push.
Yeah, his decision to cast these actors was definitely like a sort of statement in and of itself.
Yeah,
I actually don't think it served what I consider to be the message of the film about progress. It seemed, like you say, it's sort of a misguided attempt at what he thinks progress should be. Also, it involves like there's like kind of magical element to it.
Which is completely just I kind of liked that there was just no attempt to sort of.
No, Adam Driver's just discovered it or created it,
and he's managed to sort of.
He's got a way of mass producing it somehow.
Yeah, bending it to his will.
Yeah.
And using it to reconstruct his own face as well. I mean, what the fuck was that about?
Oh, mate, do you know what? Because I watched this last year at the Everyman, and I still broadly, I think it was I quite enjoyed it because of how baffling it was. I totally forgot about the face thing.
Yeah,
and that's just popped back into my mind. The whole, the whole thing about Shia LaBeouf's like economical sort of varying economical situation. The bit at the end with the arrow, John Voight getting like killed by a bow and arrow or something.
Yeah,
or
John
like
Voight kills Aubrey Plaza.
That's it. Yeah.
And shoots Shia LaBeouf's character twice in the arse.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
And then Shia LaBeouf kind of gets strung up by because he ends up becoming like a kind of like right wing populist.
That's
so
it.
So his role in the film is kind of like he's jumping on the kind of like widespread dissatisfaction with the sort of political landscape, and the way it's obviously like if it just impacting people's everyday lives, like they're losing their homes, they're poor, they can't feed their families. It's a very sort of thinly veiled comment on the ease in which a person can kind of like who is from a kind of like very privileged background can sort of weaponize that kind of mass dissatisfaction and then use that to put themselves in a position of power, then under the guise of of wanting to help people, and then just being there for
just being
self-preservation.
Fascist. Right? Yeah. Okay. I do remember that now. I remember they've kind of obvious parallels with the sort of Trump administration.
Yeah.
And like I don't know if he was thinking about the United Kingdom's equivalent, the kind of sort of far right movement and all that kind of stuff. But whatever. Yeah, I guess as a comment on how that works, I guess it sort of does.
Yeah, and then Plaza sort of plays the media.
Yep.
Very briefly, and then she marries into the kind of like marries John Voight, and then has plans to kind of like take the fortune for herself. I actually thought she was. I liked her. Yeah, she's one of the stronger elements of the film.
Yeah. She knew what film she was in, I think.
Yeah,
somehow.
Yeah. Definitely. I don't really feel like anyone else was. I mean, to be fair, like I thought Driver's performance was okay.
Yeah,
I thought he did all right. I think there's a kind of like standard of Adam Driver that you kind of come to expect, which is solid.
Yeah, it's confident. It's like a confident performance.
Yeah.
And it, sometimes lulls and sometimes is like quite captivating.
The person that played, I forget her name, but the mayor's daughter, she's pretty good in it, I thought.
Yeah.
She brings a kind of sense of earnestness to it that I think it's sorely needed.
Yeah.
And it's an earnestness that you kind of withers in the face of the kind of controversy surrounding the film around sort of Coppola's behaviour or sort of those kind of like more bizarre decisions. But I think despite the film's kind of like really sort of baffling unsubtlety and vagueness and equal measure, there is kind of like an earnestness to it. I think that he genuinely wants this film to be the kind of like the thing that drives a human race to a new dawn.
Yeah,
I mean he's incredibly vague about what that new dawn will be, but because obviously we don't have a magic face fixing
Megalon. Yeah, we don't have
material that can,
and we don't have someone that
can
stop time as well.
You can stop time. Yeah,
I do. I agree with you though. No, I think that ambition really like helps make it quite fun watch.
Yeah,
and like it's never dull at all.
No.
There's like interesting visual stuff. There's a really good moment where he's driving through it's sort of like the Megalopolis equivalent of the Narrows.
Yeah,
and there's all these statues that are crumbling. That was a cool like visual moment, even if I don't quite understand maybe it was out with the old kind of, he's kind of driving through a past that's fast crumbling or something, but like really good visual moments. And then some bad ones which are fun to critique in your own. Like I was sat at the cinema just like thinking about how they could have been done better given more time. Or like,
do you think it was budgetary limitations?
120 million this, and a lot of sort of well-known actors in it, and I think Coppola's way of working whilst in 1976 would have been supplemented by just a kind of steady cash flow from investors or from I don't know how he financed Apocalypse Now, but evidently they had too much money. I don't think it's working that way anymore. I think he probably realised the funds were drying up quickly, and the maybe latter half of the shoot had to be done fast, or in a just on a small stage or something. Like, it has that feeling to it of like,
yeah, I mean,
so does Southland Tales, to be fair. There's some ropey shit in that, like really unfinished looking, but it adds to the charm of it.
yeah, and weirdly, almost in a way, it's similar here.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I guess that kind of the earnestness, not just as a sort of societal critique, but as a cultural critique, is somewhat more. I guess there's kind of more validation in that sense, because it is a self-funded project. I mean, obviously, look, the guy's fucking, if you could fucking pull 120 million out of his arse, I mean, it's not exactly like a rags to riches tale, is it? But I think it's obviously it's a project that that has been in circulation for a long time, and a lot of studios, perhaps because of things like Southland Tales, were kind of like a bit more reluctant to throw their weight behind it.
Yeah, I think it got bought by Lionsgate. Was it? Yeah, but after it was made. It was made independently and it got secured for distribution. Lionsgate took a gamble. I don't think it paid off. Although sometimes they can be bought by like 6 different companies, so like the actual stake they hold isn't that great, which might have been how it got such a wide release. But I don't know. There's some great, like, again, like it keeps coming back to me. Like, there's a bit where a satellite falls on New York. And
the Russian satellite.
Yeah, and it like turns quite sort of sad and somber and tragic and like really visually striking for a moment. Like, that was clearly thought out in advance. Like, the VFX company probably got like a good 7 months to work on that sequence, and it really shows, because it's like
it's all the sort of people's sort of reflection shining on
the buildings.
On the buildings,
like really, really cool. Like, I mean, as an art installation, that scene in and of itself is fascinating, and it just slots into this sort of jigsaw puzzle of ideas quite well, my memory of the film is just seeing a series of seemingly unconnected scenes play out to varying degrees of success.
That's probably pretty good sort of succinct way to sort of evaluate the film overall. It does have a feeling of a film that's on the outside. Which is bizarre, considering it was sort of self-funded by someone that's obviously not struggling for cash. But there is something interesting about that. About working outside of it, because you think about it on the sort of landscape of streaming, like streaming companies, I guess in an effort to kind of legitimize themselves, have often given money to filmmakers that the big studios wouldn't have done. So even people like Scorsese have obviously used Netflix and Apple more recently for Killers of the Flower Moon. So
of course,
it's like, it's interesting to me that those same studios didn't goes back to what we were saying earlier about this kind of element of distrust towards Coppola that's just not present with filmmakers like Spielberg and Scorsese. It's like there's obviously a bit of reticence on the part, and a reticence that you can sort of, by looking at this kind of unrestrained, unfinished and baffling end result, you can it's kind of semi-justified, as much as I don't want to give studios too much credit.
No, I think,
do you know what I mean? Like, it is kind of like, from their point of view, you can see why they didn't do it, and I'm not celebrating that, because I think there's lots of sort of things you could say about how the studios are handling the way things are at the moment, but that you can disagree with, but from their point of view, and the kind of like, the way the film industry is, and it's all about sort of things that are as bankable as possible. So if they can mine old properties or find like an expansive universe to mythologize, it just doesn't fall in line with that at all. And in that respect, I like it even more.
If the film is meant to be a comment on the studio system and how they rely on existing properties as opposed to developing new ideas and moving forward, then like, it's a success in my eyes. I mean, if he's critiquing that, then like, power to him. but the way he's gone about it is a really odd, but like unique, and
it's just liberated. It's like liberated to a fault.
yeah.
By God, you sort of can't take your eyes off it.
No, it's not boring. It really isn't. Like, I want to impress that on people that might be quite skeptical of seeing it.
Yeah, I watched it with my partner George, and she fucking hated it. I mean, I could sort of understand why, because it was our 12-year anniversary, and I was like, I know the perfect film.
Yeah,
nothing's going to sort of like
establish
this kind of like let's have a night in.
Yeah,
cozy,
shut this on.
Romance.
138 minutes.
Yeah. Coppola will guide us through.
Yeah,
how wrong I was.
Admire you for
she's used
your
to
dedication.
It, right? She's used to it. She's used to me going, let's watch this, and her, that was shit.
The last time I really remember that happening was I love this film. I showed Hannah The Fountain.
Yeah, I like The Fountain.
I love The Fountain. I really
in a way, oddly similar in some ways.
Yeah. What, to Megalopolis?
Just in the
lofty ambition. Yeah. Agreed. Yeah.
Yeah. And sort of critically panned upon release.
Yeah, a lot of ideas and a lot of sort of intellectual flexing.
Yeah.
I think The Fountain is a lot more connected than Megalopolis, but
of course,
Hannah did not like that, and I think I've said this in the podcast before, but her main criticism of it was like, there's no fountain in it. I was like, yeah,
you're not wrong.
You're not wrong. Yeah. So bizarre, but not for everyone,
No. Sorry. No, yeah. I think the lack of a conventional narrative is probably what is going to put off a lot of people. Because it doesn't really, it's not interesting. Again, like you sort of alluded to, and what we've said earlier in the kind of discussion about these big kinds of movies, it's more ideas than anything else.
Yeah.
And the ideas aren't. They might sort of slot together in a way that might make them sort of worth putting in some kind of sequence, but the narrative around them is not going to reflect that whatsoever.
No, and I think the failures of these kinds of films, as much as we both love them, I do think the sort of presence of a screenwriter with a sort of deft hand at producing a digestible narrative might be of benefit to the film. It also, might not.
Or like narrowing the focus a little bit more, perhaps. I feel like some of the better films, I was thinking in the context of sort of like kind of like The Lobster, for example.
Oh yeah, okay.
The Lobster is a kind of film that critiques an aspect of like society in terms of the kind of the expectation that's placed on people to find a couple and buy a house, have kids, and do all these things, and how that can actually be quite an oppressive thing.
Yeah.
And how certain circumstances can make that and then difficult, and how unsympathetic society can be to that difficulty.
Yeah.
And obviously it's very kind of like blatantly shown in the context. You get turned into an animal if you don't find anyone. But it's a bit more focused in that context. It's and I guess the sort of thematic broadness is almost like peripheral. It's on the outside of what's going on. So you can, if you choose to, think about it through that lens.
Yeah.
But the story in itself is kind of more self-contained.
Yeah.
And I think that there's something about those kind of films that makes them more successful as a kind of like reflection on like just the inherent sort of oppressive or bizarre or odd, the things that we think are normal. Actually, they're actually quite fucking odd. They don't really make that much sense, but we've been made to feel like they make sense because it's terrifying for them not to make sense. And I think there's something in that.
Yeah.
And I feel like as a film, the best kind of films generate that kind of anxiety about that and make people reflect on it, and it makes some people feel really uncomfortable about it because some people have staked their whole life on those things, and for someone or something to say, who cares, it doesn't matter, it's terrifying. And that's where the kind of beauty of those kind of films, the success of those films lies. And I feel like if the intention of Megalopolis is
Francis Ford Coppolis.
Coppolis, thank you. You instructed me to call it that from then on. I've forgotten. You know, like if the intention of that film is to be that, then it fails because it doesn't capture. It does. The film didn't capture anxiety in that way. And even when you think about Southland Tales, it's like, you know, Southland Tales is an anxious film. It does have a sense of anxiety about it.
Yeah.
It's almost as if like Coppola's like wishy-washy views on this utopian dream kind of derail the kind of like more genuine kind of like anxiety-inducing concerns that might influence people to reflect more critically on the way they live or think. Or
that's it. Yeah, that is the sort of key difference, because Southland Tales really is like a kind of, it makes you feel something, like each like there's a through line to it, an atmospheric through line that kind of anchors you to a feeling, and that is like quite an uncomfortable feeling. But Megalopolis doesn't have that. It just has it changes tone and it changes direction quite a lot, and when it arrives at the end, it's like you're left with a big gaping hole as to what you just watched. And for some like myself, I don't really mind that if the pieces were interesting in and of themselves, but Christ, I can don't blame George at for not enjoying it.
No. The utopian element is particularly interesting to me, because I think it's an interesting argument to establish in the film that the people who are sort of desperate to maintain the status quo are so resistant to any idea that might sort of disrupt the way that things are and the way that obviously sort of suits them. And I'm, be quite accepting of of an alternative personally. But it's a kind of failing on Coppola that alternative didn't really enchant me. As someone that's perhaps more receptive than some to the idea of a difference, in the way we live our lives in some way, or society, the shift in society from this kind of obsession with money and power to something kind of like more sort of holistic and compassionate. And I think a lot of people would be receptive to that. I don't think it's, but to kind of to not deliver that and to kind of shroud it in a kind of sci-fi kind of like substance thing.
Yeah, like a young adult, sort of young adult novel.
Yeah,
in terms of like how the utopia looks and is treated.
Oh, it was naff, wasn't it?
It wasn't great. Yeah, it looked like it had been written by like the Hunger Games woman. Do you know what I mean? It had that vibe to it. But I don't remember her name. But
Take that.
Yeah. It just sort of like, just kind of like flat one note with no real kind of thought, like actual thought as to the structure of anything. It was just sort of like, it looked like a sort of weird shopping centre.
You can imagine it like Dubai or something.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know. Not good. Not good. Not thought out properly. There we go.
Yeah, okay. Outro.
Questing the cinematic void.
Well, there we have it then.
There we have it. Sort of reflecting on the discussion, it was kind of in sort of stylistically similar to the film in question. Very, very sprawling.
Yeah. Oh man, big time. Fun to revisit though, because it's been a while, like I said. So for you to kind of remind me of all these plot points and sort of even entire scenes that I'd forgotten about, and it was kind of refreshing to remind myself of the mixed bag of a cinematic experience I had with.
I kind of, because I watched it at home. And I kind of found myself thinking the whole time, like, God, this would have been really interesting to see on a much bigger screen.
It was,
with other people. Because, like, I mean, not but like just in terms of like shared communal experience. So I can't imagine there was that many people in the cinema watching it, because it didn't do very well.
No.
But there we go. Yeah, worth revisiting, worth discussing, even if a little bit late.
Yeah, definitely.
With that in mind, the werewolf film. That never was. That has appeared on streaming.
Really quickly.
I sent you a video like, oh look, it's here. But what a way to discuss. So there's a way to crudely stuff it into the discussion that the Wolfman is out.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
So we could do that.
Well, I'm up for it. Let's do it. Let's talk about werewolf films. Quite interested about the Wolfman actually, because it's Lee Whannell, isn't it? The guy who's in Saw.
Yeah.
And then directed the Invisible Man remake, which I really liked.
Okay.
It was the final film I went to see before lockdown.
I've not seen it. Maybe I'll check it out.
It's good. It's just a good sort of chilly thriller. with the science fiction elements woven in really nicely. Like, I've got a lot of confidence in him and his ability to adapt universal monster properties to good effect.
I love the original Invisible Man. It's absolutely fantastic. So yeah, okay. Also, at the time of recording this episode, just before we started, we were hit with the news about David Lynch. And his sudden passing. That was a real wound at that. To kind of an odd time, because you don't have time to reflect on his literally just
impact.
The manner of it now is like you just get a notification on your phone and that's it, and you're like, oh.
It used to be a parent would wake me up, be like, Steve Irwin's died. Like, fuck. What?
Yeah.
It was always in the morning. We had a bit of time to digest it, but now obviously news is sort of
over your Cinnamon Grahams. Do you like Cinnamon Grahams?
I do, mate. I love Cinnamon Grahams.
Did you eat them as a child?
I think I.
Question for Ben's parents, and we know you listen, so maybe you can.
I think maybe I convinced them to buy it once or twice. The sugar content probably put them off.
Understandably,
with Cheerios.
Understandably so. Yeah.
Sorry, back to
that's fine. Back to David Lynch.
Oh,
no, it's a real tragic news for us, both huge Lynch fans, and I think, let's be honest, the vast majority of people that are film fans love David Lynch. For me, he was one of the first filmmakers to, with something like Mulholland Drive, for example, to make movies that invited you as an audience member to really sink amongst them, sink your teeth into them. And there's so many opportunities for so many different interpretations. And Lynch's sort of deliberate refusal to entertain them or expand on them, or on his on his own sort of motivations. I don't know. Like, I just feel like that's so rare that you can make a film that invites that so effectively. It doesn't impact negatively on the film in any way, shape, or form.
No, and it doesn't treat the audience like stupid or kind of idiotic. It kind of invites you into the world. It kind of, it gives you something.
Yeah.
And then you're left to fill, the rest with your own ideas.
Yeah.
And sometimes that can go really wrong, and it can be really like a really pretentious thing to do.
Yeah.
And Lynch just like kind of toes that line so great, like so brilliantly. And also, I think, he's some of his films are obviously very abstract and very surreal. Some of his films are like so sad and so like human, like The Straight Story and The Elephant Man. I think he should be celebrated in equal measure for his films that made you feel something, whether that be sort of a deep sort of tragedy or warmth, as well as kind of maybe sort of baffling sort of confusion.
Yeah. So, with that in mind, we felt it'd be worth doing a David Lynch sort of deep dive.
Yes, I did a bit of a deep dive just then, actually.
Yeah, we sort of started it early doors.
Yeah.
But no, obviously very sad reasoning. But I think what better way to commemorate the work of a great filmmaker than to revisit his films?
Yeah, I'm gonna rewatch like Wild at Heart and Lost Highway.
Oh, baby,
yeah, so good.
Yeah, so good. Anyway, in the meantime, thank you for getting to the end of this episode.
Thank you.
And we will catch you in the next one.
See you then.
Bye-bye.
Bye.